Harley-Davidson? You know, the name itself it feels like a symbol. But how does a machine, something made of steel and rubber and oil, become an icon? How does it get wrapped up in ideas like freedom, rebellion, and the American dream?
That's really the question at the heart of it all. How does an object, a piece of engineering, transform into a cultural legend?
To get to the bottom of that, we're going to deconstruct the story of Harley-Davidson, piece by piece.
See, here at WhyItTV, we look at brands and cultural icons a little differently. We see them as complex systems, shaped and pressured by history, culture, and economics.
Our goal is to give you the context to really understand how things came to be the way they are. This is a place for that kind of deep dive, an ongoing exploration for people who are curious.
So let's get into it. Let's take a closer look at a name that just echoes with more than a century of American history: Harley-Davidson.
Okay, so to really understand the icon, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. Back to a time when the entire world was being reshaped by the roar of the internal combustion engine.
You know, the motorcycle wasn't born in some flash of genius. It was more of a slow evolution. First, you get the safety bicycle in the 1880s, which gave people this whole new kind of freedom. Then, pretty quickly, engineers started thinking, hey, let's strap an engine to one of those. You see Gottlieb Daimler do it in Germany. Then the Indian Motorcycle Company starts up here in North America, and finally in 1903, in a tiny shed in Milwaukee, William Harley and Arthur Davidson get into the race.
And this is a great example. Daimler's Reitwagen it was essentially a motorized bicycle. It was a really simple, direct idea for a new century. Take something familiar and give it a whole new source of power.
But let's be really clear about this. Riding a motorcycle back then was not easy. The roads were mostly just dirt tracks. If you were a rider, you were also a mechanic, because you were constantly breaking down and having to fix it on the side of the road. It was seen as this risky thing for wealthy gentlemen looking for a thrill. And it didn't take long. By 1904, newspapers were already complaining about these noisy motorcycle speed artists.
But this hobby for the rich was about to be completely redefined by global conflict. War, it turns out, became the crucible where this machine's purpose and its whole cultural meaning would be forged.
I mean, just look at this number. During World War II alone, Harley-Davidson made an estimated 88,000 motorcycles for the U.S. military. The motorcycle went from being this interesting novelty to an absolutely essential tool of war.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the cultural shift that came with it. All that military service just fundamentally changed how people saw motorcycling. It tied the machine directly to duty, to danger, and to this very specific, very rugged idea of masculinity. The rider wasn't just a sportsman having fun anymore. He was a soldier.
So what happens after the war? Well, thousands of these soldiers come home. But for a lot of them, the quiet, predictable life of suburban America, it just didn't fit anymore. And that disconnect is what gives rise to this incredibly powerful new American myth.
These guys were trained for risk. They were bonded by these intense shared experiences, and they were looking for a way to recreate that brotherhood. So they formed clubs, and they gave them intentionally provocative names. It was a way of directly rebelling against the quiet conformity of post-war civilian life. And this simmering subculture basically explodes into the national consciousness in 1947 in Hollister, California. Now, the reality of what happened was a weekend rally. There was some drinking, some drag racing, but the media portrayal, that was a story about a town being terrorized. A sensational headline, and, this is the key part, a staged photo in Life magazine created an image that was just way more powerful than the truth. The image of the dangerous outlaw biker.
And of course, Hollywood was paying very close attention. Just 6 years later, Marlon Brando's performance in The Wild One takes that stereotype the media had created and turns it into a full-blown cultural icon. The movie basically gives the rebel a uniform, the black leather jacket, the blue jeans, and that anti-authority sneer. So in response to all this public fear, the mainstream American Motorcyclist Association tries to do some damage control. They reportedly say something like, hey, 99% of riders are good, law-abiding citizens. But that other 1%? Well, the outlaw clubs grabbed that label and ran with it. It was this incredible act of cultural jujitsu. They took what was meant as an insult and turned it into a badge of honor, a declaration that they chose to be outside of polite society.
And the 1%er patch becomes the visual language for this whole new identity. It's a clear, defiant symbol that you are separate from the mainstream. It wasn't just a patch. It was a worldview sewn onto a jacket.
But as often happens, this potent, really authentic, grassroots image of rebellion would eventually be challenged and then co-opted by the very marketplace it was rebelling against.
In the 1960s, a totally new kind of machine arrives in America from Japan. The Honda CB750 was fast, it was reliable, it was technologically sophisticated. It really represented a completely different philosophy of what a motorcycle could be.
And Honda's marketing just drove that difference home. Their famous slogan, "You meet the nicest people on a Honda," was such a direct contrast to the outlaw image. And ironically, this really helped solidify Harley's identity. If Hondas were for the nice people, then Harleys became, almost by default, the bike for everybody else.
So over time, the symbol of rebellion itself becomes the product. The real danger gets polished away, and that outlaw aesthetic gets repackaged and sold as a lifestyle accessory. This created this deep, lasting tension between the original bikers and this new wave of affluent customers, the dentists and lawyers buying a weekend fantasy of rebellion. And that's a tension the brand still deals with today.
So this origin story, from a workshop to the battlefield to the movie screen, that's just one lens we can use to look at this incredibly complex icon. It's a critical part of the foundation for sure, but it's not the whole story. And understanding how these foundational myths play out in modern business, in technology, and in culture, well, that's the ongoing work of this series. Seeing how a brand navigates its own mythology is a fascinating system to study.
Which leaves us with a really fundamental question about what we buy and who we are. When you purchase an object that symbolizes rebellion, what are you actually buying? Is it the history? Is it a feeling? Or is it just the image?
And maybe the most important question of all is who really owns the story of an icon? Is it the founders, the soldiers, the rebels, the corporation that sells it? Or is it the people who keep the myth alive, generation after generation? We're going to end here, not with an answer, but with an invitation for you to keep asking.